Today I figured I'd give you guys a ranking of my top 10 PlayStation games. I've always loved this system, and it's right up there with the N64 as my favorite of the classic 3D consoles. There are a lot of great games on this system, and its library actually dwarfs the N64. It's like a 4 times bigger library, I think. And there are a lot of great games that I grew up with and loved. So I figure without further ado, I give my list the top 10 best PlayStation 1 games. Coming in at number 10 is Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Based on the fourth Star Wars film and the first chronologically, The Phantom Menace is basically an action RPG adventure game where you play as Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon Jinn, Padme, and even Padme's bodyguard, and a fun adventure that spans the length of the whole movie. I was never a big fan of the Phantom Menace movie, but I will say the video game is probably the best thing to come out of that film. And the best part of this game, if you ever play it, is definitely the Tatooine levels. It's like you're playing a mini RPG when you get there. It's also on the Dreamcast, and I just love this game, and it's one of my favorite Star Wars games, even to this day. Coming in at number 9 is Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. I've always been a fan of the Resident Evil franchise, and of the original 3, I believe 2 is still my favorite, but I do have to give 3 the slight edge over the original, just for the improved gameplay and better controls, and improved graphics as well. I still do love the original on PlayStation as well, but if I had to choose between the two, I'd have to go with 3. As far as Part 2 goes, I'd recommend the N64 version, but you can't go wrong with either one of these games. But 3 is still my favorite of the PlayStation Resident Evils, also because 2 I prefer on the N64. But this is a really fun and entertaining game. We have to run from the Nemesis, and the game basically takes place at the same time as 2. It ultimately culminates in the city's destruction as you play as Jill Valentine and try to defeat this monster and escape the city before it's too late. Great survival horror, highly recommended. Coming in at number 8 is the original Tomb Raider. Now, I love all the Tomb Raider games, and I even own the first 5 on PlayStation, but I think you really can't beat the original. Something about the darker atmosphere. It's slightly more violent and more edgy than the sequels. I still do love the other ones, and I think 2 was probably plays the best out of the 5, but 1's always my favorite. And I think it just has the most fun adventure. I wish the new Lara Croft was as badass and gung-ho as this original Lara Croft, but you really can't beat the classics. If you're a fan of adventure games and want something that's challenging and entertaining, I highly recommend the first Tomb Raider. You gotta play this game. Coming in at number 7 is Spyro the Dragon. Spyro the Dragon is a fun adventure 3D platformer, followed by 2 other games on the PlayStation 1 as well. They're all fun, and I recommend all 3, but the first is, I think, the most entertaining of the 3, and I think it has the best story. You essentially play as Spyro, and you have to rescue these other dragons from the kingdom, and fight creatures and monsters on your adventure, and it's just really fun. The game was actually recently re-released on the Xbox One and PS4 in the Reignited trilogy, and I actually do recommend that as well. But whether you're playing the remake or the original, you can't go wrong with Spyro. Coming in at number 6 is Final Fantasy VII. This is an entertaining game that was released in 1997, and is pretty much one of the most iconic and popular turn-based RPGs of all time. It's one of the best entries in the Final Fantasy series, and it's highly entertaining. I recommend this game to anyone who loves adventure or an entertaining story. I really love this game. I think it's the actual best of the PlayStation games, with Part 9 probably coming in a close second, but I had to choose one for this list, and I think Part 7 takes the slight edge over that one. Coming in at number 5 is probably the most obscure game on the list, and that's Alundra 2. I adore this game. This game is a sequel to Alundra, which was an adventure game you played as a character named Alundra, and you went around fighting pirates and other monsters and things like that. This is more like a spiritual sequel. Alundra is not even in the game. You actually play as a new character named Flint. This is a really fun 3D action-adventure game, kind of like in the style of Zelda. It shows you go battling pirates and other mechanized monsters in this wacky and zany story. It's a really long game, too, and despite it having a thicker case, it's actually only a 1-disc game. It just resembles a 2-disc game case. It's surprisingly really long, though, for a game that's only a 1 PlayStation disc, and it's probably one of my favorite adventure games ever. It's definitely underrated and overlooked, and what's great about this game being basically a spiritual successor to 1 is you don't have to play 1 to play this one. You can just start right here. I do think they take place in the same world, but apart from that, they're completely unrelated, and I recommend 2 over 1. Coming in at number 4 is a game that I do not have the booklet for, or the disc for anymore, and that's Mega Man Legends 2. I actually purchased this game some time back, but the disc was defective and kept freezing up on me. I tried to get it repaired, and that only made it worse, so all I have left is unfortunately the case. But I do have a digital copy on my PS3. A very expensive and hard to find game, Mega Man Legends 2 is my favorite of the entire Mega Man series. You basically play as Mega Man Volnut, he actually has a last name this time around, and you go around finding crystals and fighting robots, and it's just a really fun and great adventure game. If you have yourself a PlayStation 3, I recommend downloading the digital copy of it, because the physical copies will go for a lot of money these days. But this is a very fun and entertaining game, one that I really love, one that has great adventure, great action, good shooting with a blaster, and cool characters. The first game, Mega Man Legends, also known as Mega Man 64 on the N64, was also a really fun game, but I think the sequel just does everything the first game did, but does it a little bit bigger and does it a little bit better. Coming in at number 3 is Metal Gear Solid. What can be said about this game that a lot of people haven't said already? An awesome stealth espionage action game where you play a Solid Snake, infiltrate Shadow Moses, take down Liquid Snake and his organization, and save the world. This is an awesome game and is my second favorite of the Metal Gear series, with Metal Gear Solid 3 being my first favorite. You just cannot beat this classic Hideo Kojima produced game. So damn fun. If you haven't played Metal Gear Solid, get on it. It's great. Coming in at number 2 is Chrono Cross. The sequel to Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross is probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite, turn-based RPGs of all time. With an amazing story, awesome graphics for the year it came out, probably my favorite soundtrack in all of gaming, amazing themes, interesting characters and locations. There's nothing not to love about this game. It just takes me away to another world when I play this game. And to this day, it's my favorite RPG on the PlayStation and one of my favorite games of all time. But nothing can beat my number 1 favorite PlayStation game, and that is Spider-Man. My favorite superhero game ever. Spider-Man is just truly amazing. I love this game so much that I own the Dreamcast version as well as the N64 version, and I am looking to get the PC version as well. It's a game that I love and has always been a part of my childhood, and as I've gotten older, it's a part of my adulthood too. And I think it's the best the wall crawler has ever been. There are technically more advanced and more modern Spider-Man games that play better. This game puts me into the world of Spider-Man better than any of those games, and it feels like you're playing a comic book come to life. Just my absolute favorite superhero game, my favorite Spider-Man game, and my favorite PlayStation game. Well, that's my list. I figured I'd give you guys a few honorable mentions before we go. First up is Bushido Blade 1 and 2, both really great fighting games that are essentially one-hit kill fighting games. Sometimes a fight can't last more than a couple hits, but literally if you get hit in the arm, you can't use your arm for the rest of the fight. You get stabbed in the chest, it's over. You hit in the leg, you're limping for the rest of the fight. A really unique and fun fighting game that unfortunately has never been replicated. The one-hit fighting game should come back in some form, and this is probably the best example of that kind of game. I also recommend Batman and Robin, a really fun 3D, if not very flawed, adventure game where you play as Batman and Robin. Based on a 97 movie, this game is kind of crappy, but it's also kind of fun. A guilty pleasure game. I also recommend Alien Resurrection, a really fun 3D shooter for its time, and Alien Trilogy, 2 amazing games based on the Alien franchise. I recommend both of these, they're really fun, but I think I like Resurrection just a little bit more, but this one's a little more arcadey. You can't go wrong with Sorcerer's Stone and Chamber of Secrets, 2 really fun Harry Potter games. Although, admittedly, the PlayStation 2 and Xbox versions of these 2 games is better, but these are still pretty fun. I also recommend Evil Dead Hail to the King. Essentially a Resident Evil knockoff, this is still a fun and enjoyable game, and has the voice of Bruce Campbell as Ash. If you love the Evil Dead movies, you'll probably get something out of this game, but if you don't, you probably won't. But still recommended for Evil Dead fans. I also recommend Fighting Force and its sequel, Fighting Force 2. Both really great games. The second one is not quite as good as the first because it has no multiplayer, but these are really fun fighting and shooting beat-em-ups on the original PlayStation. Highly recommended and very enjoyable. I also recommend Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Battle 22 or Ultimate Battle 27 if you type in a cheat code, and Dragon Ball GT Final Bout. The only Dragon Ball games on the system, at least in America. These are still very fun, kind of dated by today's standards, but still a fun 1-2 punch, and I do recommend both of these games. I also recommend Die Hard Trilogy and its sequel, Die Hard Trilogy 2, Viva Las Vegas. Both very fun action games starring John McClane, and it's based and inspired around the Die Hard films. Really fun action through and through. I also recommend the Legacy of Kain games, Blood Omen, as well as its sequel, Soul Reaver. Very fun, very entertaining, great graphics, great story, really dark and macabre. You can't go wrong with the Legacy of Kain series. And lastly, Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro. The sequel to Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, is essentially similar to that game, but not quite as good. It's made by a different company this time around, but it was still really fun. Vicarious Visions picks up the reins from Neversoft, and they do a decent job. A fun sequel that I really do recommend if you love the first one, and I do. Well, that's my list. I thank y'all for watching, and peace out.